Welcome to the Khanin Institute. I'm Isabella Tabarovsky. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to make a couple of announcements, then I'll introduce Ze'ev, and we'll start our event. So tomorrow, Wednesday, June 5th at 4 p.m., we're going to have a book launch for Atlantic Council Senior Fellow Anders Aslund, Russia's Crony Capitalism. On Wednesday, June 12th at 2 p.m., we're going to have an event, Nord Stream 2 Under Pressure and a Looming European Gas Crisis, with our Title VIII short-term scholar, Tom O'Donnell. Today, we're really pleased to have with us Dr. Ze'ev Khanin, who is one of the leading Israeli experts on the Russian Jewish community in Israel, the diaspora, and the Israel FSU, former Soviet Union, relations and politics. Dr. Khanin received a PhD in political science from Moscow Institute for African Studies at the USSR Academy of Sciences in '89, and in '91 completed his postdoctoral studies at the Institute for Russian Soviet Studies at the University of Oxford in the United Kingdom. He currently serves as chief scientist of the Israeli Ministry of Aliyah and Integration. He's also an associate professor with the Department of Political Middle Eastern Studies at Ariel University and lectures on political studies at Bar Ilan University in Israel. He has also served as political commentator for the Israeli Channel 9 TV, the Voice of Israel Radio, and BBC Russian service. His academic publications include 9 books, 8 edited collections, several monographs, and numerous articles on Israeli, East European, Jewish, and African politics and society. Ze'ev, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Isabella. Shalom to everybody. Good morning. Thanks for inviting me to Khanin Institute. It's a big honor for me. I would like to say a few words about the issue which we are going to discuss now, which is what's the role of the Russian Jewish communities, where they are, and especially two biggest groups of the Russian-speaking Jewry, first in Israel and second in the United States and Canada, in what way they impact the local politics and whether they have any structure, any institutional infrastructure, and any force to influence the local politics. Okay, first of all, let me say a few words, demographic notes, what we are talking about. As you can see, on the eve of the destruction of the Soviet Union, there were about 3 million Jews that lived in the USSR. For the 3 major groups, they were in Russia, Ukraine, less in Belarus, and about 440 million thousand, I'm sorry. They were in other FSU republics, especially in Southern Caucasus and in Central Asia. Since then, the Russian-speaking Jewry, they were dispersed all over the world, and at the moment we have Russian Jewish communities that settled in the 52 countries in the 5 continents. So from this point of view, we may say that at the moment we have so-called transnational Russian Jewish diasporas. 3 major centers of this diaspora are actually FSU, former Soviet Union, about 800,000 people. We have this in more details, meaning that besides the so-called core Jewish population, they have also those who meet the regulations of the Israeli law of return, meaning they are able to come to Israel and get Israeli citizenship immediately. That is why the local Jewish communities also work with them. Besides that, you have, that's about, as you see, 900,000 people. About 200,000 people live between 150 and 100,000. They live in the United Europe, mainly in Germany, but also in Austria, in Czechia, in England, Great Britain, a little bit in France and Benelux. That's one center, which is so-called in the Old World. Another center, about 1 million people in Anglo-Saxon world, mainly in the United States and Canada. There are different ideas how many Jews, Russian-speaking Jews, actually live in the USA. The minimalist definition between 520 to 550,000 people. So maximalist approach, they're talking that USA and Canada boast Russian or semi-Russian, Jewish or semi-Jewish or Russian-speaking with some accent to Judaism community, which is about 800,000 people, which all of them are members of the so-called Jewish households. And the third group, The third center of the Russian-speaking Jewry is, of course, Israel. Israel, at the moment, as a chief scientist of the Absorption Ministry, or now we call ourselves Aliyah and Integration Ministry, I know how many really FSU Jews live in the former Soviet, came from the former Soviet Union and live in Israel at the moment. You can see it here. Since September 1989, there are like a little bit more than at about 1.1 million Jews and their family members came from the FSU to Israel. So at the moment, we have now about 900,000 people that were born in the former Soviet Union still with us here. Of course, we can talk about the second generation, which is about 300,000 people, but it depends on the different sociological schools, whether they should be appended to the Russian-speaking community of Israel or regarded as the part of the native-born. That's really the question, how you define it. In any event, this is a little bit more precise data for those who are interested. Among them, you have about a little bit more than 100,000 people who left Israel and permanently live abroad at the moment. I would say that about 30,000 of them in the United States, thus becoming a part of the American Jewish community and American Russian Jewish community and American Israeli Russian Jewish community and American Israeli community, whatever it is. So that so-called multiply identity. And this, of course, affects the political behavior of these people wherever they live. So let me to say, first of all, a few words that will help us to understand why Israeli-Russian community has so substantial impact on the local politics. To say a few words about whether it's to answer the question whether we are talking about really community or just a group of people, statistical category. To my mind, it's much more the first rather than the second. We do have a specific group of Israeli Jewish population or a part of the Jewish collective, which could be defined as a subculture or culture communal, different culture communal group. If you will have a look here, you will see that between 70 to 80% of those who came to Israel, in the recent 30 years, they define themselves belonging personally to Israeli Russian-speaking Jewish community. We talked with Isabella in concern of the definition. Normally, for immigrants of this kind, you use the word refugee. In Israel, we prefer the word olim, meaning those who made aliyah, descent, and send. On the contrary. That means those who are resettled in their native homeland. That is why we prefer not to use the word immigrant or refugee. Also, American understanding has a different definition. We understand that. But if you will have a look here, you see, ladies and gentlemen, this data concerning the generations of those who immigrated from the former Soviet Union. This is the age at the time of Aliyah. Meaning the second generation, the so-called 1.5 generation, 1.25 generation, meaning the 1.5 generation are those who came to Israel and before starting their school and until the end of the high school. And then those who were at the age, were in a time of Aliyah at the age 18 and more, they're regarded to be like a first generation of immigrants. So the elder person, the more readily he declares his or her belonging to the Israeli Russian Jewish community. But even those who were born in Israel or came before age 5, as you can see, about half of them still in some way or totally understand their belonging to the Russian Jewish community, which means that this phenomenon does exist. If you will have a look what really builds the margins of this Israeli Russian Jewish community, that's first of all, as we can see here, traditional social networks. About more than 50% believe that most of their best friends or all of their best friends are actually those who came from the same place as they are, or their parents came. if you will come back to the age structure, the younger immigrant, the more often he believes that he is totally integrated in terms of of his or her social network. But still, those under the age of 24, they believe that you can see that more than a half, about 60% of their friends are actually Russian-speaking, or majority of them are Russian-speaking. So what does it mean? Does it mean that we are talking about Russian ghetto in Israel? No. We are talking about Russian Jewish subculture in Israel, which is the part of Israeli Jewish collective, and it doesn't intervene, it doesn't means contradicts with the fact that majority of these people prefer to convey Russian language and culture to the next generation. Another element of the margins that build up the Russian-speaking community in Israel is, of course, Russian media. But what sort of media we are talking about? We are talking about Israeli Russian-speaking media, okay? It's first of all Channel 9. That's not because I'm a political commentator, used to be of this channel, but they do believe that it's not. This is not a Russian channel in Israel, channel of Russia. That's Israeli channel which speaks in Russian language and works for the integration of this population into Ma'arachet Musagim, like we say in Hebrew, meaning their Musagim. The ideas, the system of Israeli ideas and concepts. From here you see that my two recent comprehensive opinion polls. From here you can see that still there is a very substantial group of people who use the Russian language media as the major source of their information. And the third important element, which keeps people together, is actually the question whether those who came from the FSU and the next generations of those who came from the FSU, whether they have specific problems in Israel, or maybe they have the same problems like any other in that state. As you can see here, about between 60 to 70% still believe that in some way the problem that face people who came from the Soviet Union and the former Soviet Union actually has a specific connotation, and it's of course makes some difference concerning when people come, but still there is not there is no substantial difference between those who came in the early 90s and the early 2000s, as you can see here. And of course, many people believe that there is still you know this expression, you have glass ceiling, meaning that as if everybody is equal, but in fact there are some problems for those who are not exactly were born there. Substantial number of people still believe that this phenomenon Israel does exist. But as I said, we have the Russian-speaking community. We don't have Russian ghetto in Israel. In terms of their identity, we even stopped asking question whether, in what way you feel Israeli. Everybody feels Israeli. That means that in social terms, in civic terms, the dominant identity of those came from the FSU is actually Israeli identity, as you can see here. In what way does it impact the political behavior of this group? You see here that if to compare, this is not exactly very, I don't have a very recent poll of general Israeli public. That is why I compare two opinion polls of 2015, which actually makes not much difference with what we have now. If we'll have a look here, according to this data, there is no substantial difference between native Israelis and those who came from the former Soviet Union. Still, you can see here that probably the FSU Jews, they a little bit more consented or concentrated right-wing. That explains why overwhelming majority of FSU immigrants, FSU Olim, they actually belong to the moderate right or moderate liberal right, I would say it. In American terms, that left wing of the Republican Party, which is exactly what happens in Israeli society in general. There is no much difference, if you can have a look here, between those who came in the 1990s and until very recently. That from this, in the political terms, we may say that the Russian community is a one unit. We are talking quite often whether it could be citizenship without loyalty in Israel. That's one of the slogans of Israeli politicians, whether everybody should enjoy civic rights if he's not or she not loyal to their country. According to the Russian Jews, Israel is a Jewish state, nekuda, full stop. Which means that those who would like to enjoy the state will understand him or her, should understand the national nature of the state, whether it's for good or for bad, but that's the situation. We don't have much time about that, but just to show you some data, we say in Hebrew, "L'savev et haozen." As you can see here, overwhelming majority of Russian-speaking who live in Israel, they are, of course, when they are asked in terms how to solve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, they would prefer various versions of the right-wing ideas, including the extension of Israeli sovereignty on the old territories of Judea and Samaria, meaning the West Bank, you call it. However, they also believe that they're ready to consider some other models of settlement, but without any substantial territorial concessions. As you can see is here as well. What really, just in the sake of comparison, for me it was very interesting to have a look what Russian Jews in Russia think about it. I've just completed a very comprehensive research in 4 FSU republics, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and Moldova, and we ask the same question we ask Israeli Russians, and we ask Israeli non-Russians, what, according to them, is the way to solve Arab-Israeli conflict, and we see that it's more or less the data, the approach is pretty much the same. About half believe in the right-wing models of the solution, about less than 10% believe in two-state solution. And now, saying all that, why it is so important? In principle, if we are talking about Russian-speaking communities all over the world, their impact on the German politics, on Ukrainian politics, on the Russian politics, and I would also say on American politics is pretty limited. Israel is their only country where Russian-speaking Jews who came in the recent 30 years, they compose about 14% of the local electorate, meaning they're responsible for between 16 to 18 Knesset seats out of 120. We know perfectly well that since the beginning of the big Aliyah from the former Soviet Union, there is no way to become prime minister in Israel if one doesn't enjoy their support of Russian-speaking Israelis. Pretty quickly, Russian-speaking Jews became split according to the same lines of Israeli politics, like all Israeli society. We have right, centrist, and left-wing. We have religious and secular. We have a liberal economy-oriented and social economy-oriented. We have Ashkenazi, that means Jews, they came from the European republics of the former Soviet Union, and Russian Sephardim, meaning Caucasian, South Caucasian, and Central Asian Jews. And we definitely mean that they definitely have those who came from the big cities, and integrated in more spread urban culture, and those who came from the periphery, to the periphery. But still, which means that support of the Russian-speaking community is critical for success or lack of success of any Israeli political party. And you can see it here at the moment. We just finished the recent elections to the 21st Knesset, which was unable to produce the government, and now we are starting immediately another electoral campaign. Why? Political party, Our Home Israel, which is supported predominantly by immigrants or Olim from the former Soviet Union, is actually, it turned out that this is the decisive point, whether there is government in Israel or there is no right-wing government in Israel, as well as left-wing government in Israel. So in spite of the fact that Russian-speaking Jews is not a majority, they're still pretty influential. Yeah? And the question is how they represent their own interests. So I'm interested as a researcher in the more optimal platform as they see it, on which platform they can express their interest concerning not just the questions important for community itself, like welfare issues, housing, education, culture, and so on, but also which platform they're interested to use in order to say, to have say, like you say in the United States here, meaning to present their vision on their decision-making process on the national level. Foreign policy, religion and state, economic policy, civic issues, corruption, education, environment, and so on and so forth. If you will have a look at this table, we can see that since 2004 and until now, there is a substantial decrease of the idea of the sectarian Russian party, meaning that a specific political party which presents accidentally the interests of the immigrants from the former Soviet Union, this popularity is decreasing. Still, and increasing the popularity of the idea that Russian-speaking community doesn't need specific political lobby. Existing political parties can represent their interest in an adequate way. But the dominant group, as you can see, they belong to the two political models, so-called Russian party with the Israeli agenda, and nationwide political party with their strong Russian component, Russian-speaking component. If we will translate into the language of the Israeli politics, that means Liberman's Party Israel, Our Home, and Likud, ruling Likud. There's actually two political parties that attract the majority of the Russian-speaking world. And the result is pretty clear. I was trying to collect together the results of their of the opinion polls and the actual vote in the so-called Russian Kalpi, Russian polling booth, during the Israeli elections, starting from 2009 in the recent 10 years. And here you can see that about a third voted for political parties that accidentally represent the Russian-speaking interest. About a third, that means national-wide parties with their strong pro-community agenda, and about a third, as you can see here, actually support the political parties that doesn't have any specific connotation in concern of the questions and issues related to the immigrants from the former Soviet Union. Okay. What Israelis expect from their leaders? I would say here that Mr. Lieberman, together with Mr. Shoigu, two defense ministers, and you can see here that they expect from their leaders to deal with the same problems like the general Israeli society. But these problems, they understand differently. The problems are more problematic for those who don't have roots and assets in the country, but still they understand, they want that their world vision will be also represented in the national agenda. Okay, whether it's also true in concern of Russian-speaking community here in the United States. In some way it is, okay, here are the data of my colleague Sam Kliger, director of the RINA, Research Institute for New Americans in New York, director of the Russian Department of American Jewish Committee. According to his data, his opinion polls in New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, and some other places, opposite to American Jews, that means Native Americans, Jews, overwhelming majority of whom are actually third, fourth, and fifth generation of the Russian Jews, but that's another story. The opposite to their overwhelming support of the Democratic Party, those who came from the former Soviet Union, either directly to United States from the FSU, or some of them who stayed for a time being in Israel, they predominantly vote for Republican Party. It started during the presidential elections of 2004. In 2000, majority of the Russian-speaking Jews voted for Clinton, meaning that, okay, according to certain reasons, it should be discussed separately, but after 2004 and until now, until the recent Trump elections, recent presidential elections, between 65 to 75%, sometimes 80%, vote for a Republican Party. You can see it for the registered vote. You can see it for in comparison with the Native American Jewish vote, various details. I can show what exactly electoral data shows what is their political opinion of the Russian-speaking community, whether they able to make any impact on that. In principle, not, but in the swing vote states, sometimes it works. We're really unable to differentiate the Russian vote with the other vote in the places like Ohio, like Florida, or some other places which are very important for the destiny of the presidential elections. But probably there is a contribution of the Russian-speaking Jews here, living here in the United States in some way. They are able to impact whether it's it or not. It's also this question for the discussion. Okay. Certainly, like in Israel, we have age differences also in the United States, meaning the younger they are, the more often they vote of their Native American Jews. But if, for instance, in the recent elections, about 80% of American Jewish youngsters voted for Hillary Clinton and 20% for Donald Trump, among the young Russians, that's about half and a half. It's much less that according to that among their parents, but still it's different with their general American Jewish public. Just to show you an example, what can we see here in Russia? That's if Russian Jews living in Russia would combine the parliament, will be responsible for the structure of the parliament, it will be predominantly, it will be dominated by the liberal right-wing political parties, Yabloko and the Union of the Right Forces, which is interesting, which is absolutely different in concern of the real results of the elections. Okay, and the final issue, which I would like to say one word about that. Many of those who live in Israel and the United States still keep their Russian citizenship. And some of them participated in recent presidential elections. As you can see here, between 77% in the Russian Federation, 72% in Israel, and 63% in the United States voted for Vladimir Putin, an independent candidate. Which one could say, oh, but we have a Russian lobby, pro-Russian lobby in Israel and United States at least. It could be correct if we will not forget about the fact that only 8% voted, meaning that 92% ignored the Russian elections, in spite of the fact that they're able to vote, which from this point of view, they could be compared with those in Russia that believe that as far as unable to change anything, the best way to limchot, meaning to protest against the current regime, is actually not to vote. Refrain from voting. And that's actually what happened in Israel and in the United States. Among those who did vote, there is a substantial difference, 3 and 4 times more voted for the liberal and social liberal and economic liberal parties rather than the Communist Party and the Party of Power. Okay, and really the final issue. I asked Israelis, do they think that Israel and United States are too close, and we should consider redirection of Israeli foreign policy interests into Russia? And as you can see here, 43% believe that Israel and Russia should have better relations, but not at the expense of the special partnership with the United States. No doubt of that. That means there is no question whether in Israel, and I also believe in the United States, there is a pro-Russian lobby. There is no pro-Russian lobby, okay? And those Jews who live in Israel and the United States, that's my final sentence, I would say, they're a result, much more a result of the local experience rather than the Soviet legacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ze'ev. You've given us lots and lots to think about. So while, as our audience gets some thoughts together for questions, I'll ask you a couple, if I may. So one question that I wonder about is, and one thing that you often hear about, is that Russian-speaking Jews tend to vote on the right side of the spectrum because they like strong leaders, they like authoritarian leaders, and so therefore they like Lieberman for that same reason. That's why they like Trump? How do you respond to that?
Well, the short answer is no, but you would probably interested my answer why. They vote for the right wing because of 3 reasons. Okay, starting with the United States. Both in Israel and United States, immigrants from the former Soviet Union, they're unable to hear the word socialism. Simply, just like that, okay? And for them, the left-wing parties, like the Labor in Israel, Democratic Party in the United States, they demonstrate or they symbolize what they escaped from, that ideas. That's one thing. Okay, you can, and also the leaders of the Labor in Israel and Democrats in the United States, they can talk to them from morning till night that they're not socialists, that they're not communists, that they're for the free market, whatever they are, but that's the symbol, okay? Also in Israel, the left wing is related to concessions to Palestinians, to the Arabs here. And from this point of view, you can say that they support the strong state, meaning how you say it, make America great again? You know, that's about. Okay, make Israel great again. Second, and certainly those who came from the huge country to a small country, they are unable to understand is there anything to divide, you know, more than it's already divided. And finally, if you're coming back to American Russian Jews, for them, their motivation to vote for this or that party is actually very much related to approach of this party in concern of the foreign policy issues, especially Israel. Since Republicans are accepted in this community as pro-Israeli, much more the Democrats, that is why they get most of their vote. If you will take, for instance, American Jews, that less than 40% were in Israel, and concerning the Russian-speaking Jews of America, that more than 60% they were in Israel. And if you will take into account that every Russian-speaking Jew all over the world has their first distant relatives in Israel, you understand why they're ready to support those political parties which clearly accent their intention to have good relations and support Israel. And finally, saying no to your question, I would also have to say yes in some way, but meaning that the strong leader that should follow their proclaimed agenda and not make zigzags, you know, on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday.
Okay, thank you. Do we have questions? Okay, so let's start right here. Please wait for the microphone, introduce yourself, and let's be brief in the way you phrase your question.
תודה רבה גם לך.
I'm curious about the views of the different components of the Israeli-Russian community toward the Israeli Arabs. Do they have friends from this community? Do the younger larger?
Okay, it's an excellent question. First of all, according to the polls that I know, and some of them I did as a chief scientist of the absorption ministry, I would say that, especially the relatively recent poll of 2014, they show that if we will take three groups, the first group which are favorable to Israeli Arabs. You're talking about Israeli Arabs or in general Arabs, including the Palestinian Arabs? Okay. Yeah, I understand you. Okay, so if you compare with the native Israelis, you have more native Israelis than Russian-speaking Jews that favorable have a favorable approach to Arabs. At the same time, you have more native Israelis, Jews, native Israelis, that are unfavorable to Israeli Arabs, and not only Israeli Arabs, than the Russian-speaking Jews. So they're the biggest group, they're indifferent to them. That means as far as they are not involved in the crimes or terrorist activities, they have nothing against of them. It could be partly explained that the interface between the Russian community and the Arab-speaking community in Israel is quite limited. Probably besides those who live in the settlements, in the Jewish settlements beyond the Green Line, then they have this all sorts of connections, and there we see a very strange phenomenon. On one hand, we have a sort of alienation. On the other hand, I see more and more people, especially young people that were born or grew up in the Russian-speaking families, that they believe that if Arabs would disappear, their world will be not completed, meaning that they started to live with the Arab-speaking population. So I wouldn't say that they're specifically, especially against of this group of the population. Still, on the other hand, if you ask them whether they in favor of the preservation of by the Israel of their Jewish identity, the question is definitely yes, more than among non-Russian speaking Israelis. If you ask them whether a person should be loyal to the Jewish state, the answer is definitely yes. So there is no one answer to your question. Means Russian-speaking Jews are not racist. That's one. That's a piece of good news. On the other hand, they're definitely not a lobby for the all citizen states, which could be a piece of good news and bad news, depends on how you look at this. I would say since the substantial influx of the Russian-speaking population came to Israel, and Arabs understand that, the question of the all citizen states is very distant from us.
Okay, thank you. So let's take this question right here. Right. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
My first question is, how many of the Jews that come from Russia are really Jewish, or are they trying to get out of Russia because it's so anti-Semitic and it's a really hard life? So I hear that a lot of them aren't even really Jewish.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fortunately I have an exact data about that. But before saying that, I will ask you, first of all, to take into account the fact that Jewish identity in the Soviet Union is different than Jewish identity in the West. In the West, it's mainly religion. In the United States, it's religion and ethnicity. If to believe to the recent Pew Center study, that's sort of a combination between religion and ethnicity, nationality. As Zvi Gittelman used to say it, for American Jewry, religion is a facet of ethnicity. In Israel, it's also both. But in the former Soviet Union, Jewishness means ethnicity. You are ethnic Jew. That is why you cannot be Russian and Jewish. You either or. Okay, you're either Georgian or Jewish, or you're either Ukrainian or Jewish. At the moment, you have a postmodern identity, which means that people, especially of the mixed origin, mixed marriages, they can say that I'm Ukrainian and Jewish, okay, together. So those who are not Jews according to Halacha, according to the religious definition, overwhelming majority of them who came to Israel, in the recent 30 years, according to my estimation, about 60% of them have this or that sort of a Jewish identity. But if you are interested in the numbers, that's among 1.1 million who came to Israel from the FSU in the recent 30 years, 307,000 are not registered as Jews by the Israeli Ministry of Interior, which you also have a quite wide range of definitions. You have those whose father is Jewish and mother not, and you have those who only one of the grandparents is Jewish, and you have spouses for husbands and wives of all the three categories: Jews according to Halacha, half Jewish, and quarter Jewish. I have a special research about that, and for those who care about it, I would say that more than 90% of those who are not Jewish according to Halacha sociologically see themselves as a part of the Israeli Jewish community, and they're patriots of the Jewish state.
Well, and I think we
And
want
I
to.
just had one more question. How many of these Russians who didn't really practice Judaism that much, they were more cultural? I think.
Okay. Also,
How many of them turned extreme Orthodox?
I see. You ask one by one extremely good questions. Okay. So, according to the polls, I would say that opposite to Russia or Soviet Union, where the religious identity was dichotomic, meaning believer, not believer, believe in God and non-believe in God. In Israel, the community very quickly integrated into a world of Israeli world of understanding. This Hamishiyah, these 5 models here: ultra-Orthodox, religious Zionist, like me, traditionalists, secular, and atheists. I would say that we have about 7% of atheists, about 55% of seculars, meaning they have nothing to do against religion but not practice the commandments of Judaism. You have about between 17 to 22% of those who keep tradition in this or that way. You have about 3 to 4% of religious Zionists and about 2% of ultra-Orthodox.
Thank you. Okay, we have a question right here, Irina.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Very
you.
interesting. Yeah,
Thanks.
I have a question about different waves of immigration. Did you manage to look at these differences? Because in the United States, for instance, those who came to the United States in the end of 80s or in the beginning of 90s, and those who came after 2010, they have different motives. They left actually different countries, and their behavior in this new country is different. So did you look at these differences between generation? And my second question about educational level of immigrants from the former Soviet Union in Israel, because in the United States we know that those who came, especially in the 90s, they were highly educated professionals that contributed a lot to U.S. economy. What about Israel's situation in Israel?
Definitely we had a look at the different generations. I have to a little bit more of the slides, but I don't. Meaning that there is a difference between, as I said, those who came like a second generation, they'll be before school, at the age of school age, and those who came young and those who came adult here. There is a certain difference in concern of the belonging to the community and political world vision. And if you're talking about cultural behavior, so I would say that 1.5 generation is as educated or interested in the education as much as their parents a year, but we don't have enough information in concern of the second generation because they're just about to finish schools. I can say about my family, and I have the elder one who is about 1.5 generation. He works for Michael Bloomberg in Tel Aviv Research and Development. Technion, everything is good, like normal Russian Jew. And my younger one, who just finished his army service, it's better to say Navy service, so he's still thinking whether he's going to get first degree in archaeology, first degree in physics. It's what was not so a bit, but still, at the end of the day, all of them they finish with a higher education degree. I believe I don't know much what they're in concern of their American Jews, but I believe that it's more or less the same there. Concerning the contribution, economic contribution to Israeli economy, we had a special research. I would say that the impact of the Russian-speaking Jewry is in a very substantial mode is one of the backgrounds of the Israeli economical miracle of late 1990s, early 2000. The country got the same number of the engineers as Israel had before the big Aliyah, twice as much scientists as Israel had, 25,000 medical employers. They actually postponed for 20 years the need to open another medical school in Israel. We're just opening now. So my answer is definitely yes.
Ze'ev, and I think what I heard in Irina's question, and it was also my question, is there a difference between people who came, for example, 30 years ago and people who are coming now, Putin Aliyah, right? Do they all fit into this pattern, or is there a difference?
Well, okay, we're about to finish good news here. Okay, well, I have some nice words about Putin Aliyah, so-called here. That's, first of all, we are receiving the quality of Aliyah, which we are actually lost any hope to get. In the early 2000s. We are getting people from the big population centers, which actually equally represent the structure of the Jewish community in the former Soviet Union. On the other hand, they represent the restructuring and decrease of the higher education in the post-Soviet states. So when in 1990s we got engineers, medical doctors, teachers, scientists, researchers, so on and so forth, now we have lawyers, market specialists, financial consultants, which is wonderful, But I work, oh my God, I work for the integration ministry. What should I do with all these people here? How I would find a job for them? On the other hand, those engineers that actually came and made Israel great again, now they are going to retire. And every Sunday and Monday, the chairman of Itachdut HaTa'asyanim, their association of industrial owners and so on, and business owners in industry, they're calling to my minister and saying, well, no, okay, do we have more engineers? Do we have more doctors? Said, okay, would you be interested? Yeah. Okay, so we have to work hard about that. But we have a very good quality of people. Intelligent, industrious, patriotic, by the way. Okay? And everything will be all right. Yebaseder.
All right. I think, what do we have? Do you have any more questions? Okay, right here, please.
No, I'd like to ask about the Green Line. How many live on this side? How many on that side of the old Green Line?
Of all Jews or Russian-speaking Jews?
Yes, of yours.
Whom are mine?
Yeah, well, I mean in the larger.
Okay.
And does it matter?
Yeah. Okay. It depends to whom, I know a couple of people for whom it's very much matter, but I know people who, just don't ask questions. I would say in this way that we are not talking about the Jewish quarters of Jerusalem, of East Jerusalem. We are not here. So if we are not talking about, so even according to American administration, that's already the capital of Israel. So, okay, if we are talking about Judea and Samaria, we have there something like 320,000 Jewish settlers. I would say that about 10% of them to 15% of them are actually originally from the former Soviet Union.
Please wait for the microphone.
I read in the Times of Israel articles by Simona Weinglass, who talked about a great percentage of the Russian Jews who are corrupt, who have influenced the Israeli government in
I didn't understand who are what?
corruption, who have brought Russian or Soviet or corruption into
okay.
into the government.
If you're talking
into
about
the
corruption, we are all right with that. You know, they don't need Russian Jews in order to fund corruption. Yeah. Oh well, and I don't think that this definition, this story she sold you is exactly true to the fact.
Okay, please, over here. Please wait for the mic.
Hi. So you talked a little bit about how Russian-speaking Israeli media kind of influences the Russian subculture population that's currently in Israel. Can you speak a little bit about how American media and Russian media itself, like in these independent entities, also kind of how they affect the relationship and the political preferences of the Russians that are currently in Israel?
Well, it's an excellent question, and the right answer is it very much depends on the group of the population, I would say. Still, we have that, according to my data, what I know, according to what I know, you have about 27 to 30% of those who came from the FSU in Israel. That the major source of their information is the Russian-speaking media, Israeli. You have like 10 to 12% for their source of information is actually Russian media, meaning of these federal channels from Moscow and from Kiev and so on and so forth. And the rest, especially the group of young groups of the population, they first of all they go to the Hebrew, the Hebrew-speaking media. But you know, there is targil, there is a game, you know, among the sociologists. We normally ask question if something happens, something dramatic, a terrorist act, you know, something. Like a natural catastrophe or something, you need immediately to be updated. What is going on? Yeah, or which channel will you switch on? Will you go to internet? Will you go to TV? Will you try to understand from the radio and so on? And it turned out that those who tell that first of all they're not so much watching Russian TV or read Russian internet, they're mainly Hebrew or English speaking. It turned out that the first of all will switch on the TV channel 9, which is Russian channel. Oh, okay, so it's a complex answer. I wouldn't say that there is one answer to your question. So I believe that we live in a postmodern multicultural world and people are trying to get information from different sources. Concerning speaking about younger generation, I have this data, but okay, just believe me. Concerning the younger generation, we see a very interesting story. When they were very young, like in the high school, they preferred to forget Russian as much as possible. Okay, but now they're about 30 and more. And they understand that Israel is a very strange country. On one hand, it's very developed. It's a part of the global world. It's really high-tech, startup nation and so on. On the other hand, it's still in other fields you have like a more or less a traditional economy, like in construction and so on. So, and a young person who just graduated or about to graduate from the university or immediately after army asks question, which part of the economy I'm interested to be, a part of the global economy or 20 years before, yeah? And they understand that the knowledge of Russian as English and Hebrew is gives a great deal of advantage. So we are coming back, we see the generation that come back to Russian language, Russian culture, and so on and so forth, yeah? Like my children, for instance, they didn't speak Russian at all. So now their Russian is okay. Okay. Of course, the English and Hebrew is better, much better. And I believe that that's a good example for the whole generation, I would say.
Ze'ev, I want to ask you, something, if you could maybe comment on what just happened in the election, in the Israeli election, or rather in the failure to form a coalition, right, and the decision to go to another election. So the main actor there obviously was Avigdor Lieberman, who had a certain set of demands. They were not met. At least that's how it played out, right? And so then the coalition didn't form. Israel went to another election.
Right.
Was he expressing the demands that were reflective of the interests of the Russian-speaking Jews, or were they more the demands that are reflective of some portion of the Israeli Jewry?
Well, I would say that, if you're talking about Lieberman, he never said that his party is the sectarian. He always demanded that it's mainstream. Still, his definition was interesting. He said, Israel, our home, is a political party which has a national-wide agenda and which electorate, due to historical reasons, is predominantly consists of the Russian speakers. And we are, of course, interested to provide, support our constituency because integration of Aliyah is a great goal of Zionism. So even meaning the sectarian issues, he believes that it first of all in the interest of the general society. Concerning his coalition talks demands, only one of them were actually clearly in support of the Russian-speaking community, meaning to provide the pension that should be, living allowances should not be less than 70% of the minimum salary in Israel. But actually it was demand to provide it all Israeli pensioners, not only those who came from the FSU. When I asked him, what do you mean actually? That doesn't mean that it should be a sort of a how you call it? How you say? Like a social help, social security. So I mean, yeah, it's welfare, but it's like a sort of a. All the words in Russian, in Hebrew, and in English, this word escaped from me now. Chesed, like we say in Hebrew. What's the English? What the English?
Charity.
Charity. Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you so much. Whether it's, do you mean it's a charity? I said, huh?
Mitzvah.
No, it's even not mitzvah. If it's a mitzvah for Israeli economy. That means that in the recent 30 years, those who came at the age of 40 and 45 to Israel, they didn't secure their pension funds, pension plans. But working for 20 or 25 years in Israel, they become a part of Israeli middle class. And they bought their houses, they have mashkantao, that means mortgages, and they bought cars, and they are used to buy. Their consumption behavior is actually like Israeli middle class, and now they retire and they immediately drop to the underprivileged class. Okay, it's problematic in social terms, but it's also problematic, according to him, in economic terms. You immediately take out of Israeli market, consumption market, quarter million people. Okay, for Israel, it's a lot concerning that economic growth is actually much more a result of the personal consumption in Israel. From helping to yours, meaning here, you also help to the general society, according to him. The rest of the demands actually were mainstream, meaning the draft law of the Haredi, meaning ultra-Orthodox. The resource of Aliyah is actually expired. Meaning, so we need, according to the OECD recent report, they say that Israel, which demonstrates a very substantial, very impressive economic growth, it's about to finish if we will not bring two groups of the population into the labor market, meaning Haredi male and Arab female. And the only way to bring Haredi into their labor market to make them to get a modern education, meaning secular education, and so on and so forth, which is the model of integration into Israeli society. The two major institutions are army and school. nothing could be done. So that's actually a mainstream idea. But, you know, in Hebrew we say, yesh ratzui v'yesh matzui. That's what we have what we want and what we can. Okay, so in order to build up a coalition, the prime minister should answer the demands of also the ultra-Orthodox parties, which together they had 16 seats and Lieberman had 5. So that is why ultra-Orthodox got yes and he got no. So.
Well, and just to finish, to wrap up, we have 2 minutes. You know, I'm going to ask you to put on your political commentator's hat and tell us what is, first of all, do you think that this strong position that Lieberman took is going to bring him more votes in this coming election? And then more broadly, what is your outlook and prediction for this next round?
If you would ask me this question in Israel, I would probably answer because Israel is the land of prophets. But as far as I'm in the United States, I'm unable to answer this question. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ze'ev, so much for.
Thank you so much.